The antiseptic hit my skin before I was fully conscious, and the sting ripped through every exposed nerve like someone was pouring fire directly into my bloodstream. A blinding white light slammed down into my eyes, sharp enough to split my skull in two, and for a moment I could not tell whether I was alive dying or floating somewhere in between. Then a voice shouted right beside me, and reality snapped back in brutal fragments. BP, dropping move now. Hands clamped onto both sides of the gurney as it jolted forward, rattling over every seam in the hospital floor. Each bump sent a shockwave up my ribs, a twisting, stabbing pain that made breathing feel like swallowing broken glass. I tried to lift my right arm, but it hung useless at my side, like it no longer belonged to me. Possible internal bleed, we need ultrasound, stat. Another voice called out from above my head. Someone pulled an oxygen mask over my mouth, and icy air rushed in, mixing with the metallic tang of blood already filling my mouth. A monitor beeped too fast, completely out of rhythm with the slow, heavy pounding inside my skull. My hair stuck to my cheek in wet clumps, and when I blinked, a thin line of red slid down the side of the mask and dripped onto the pillow beneath me. I focused on that smear of red because it was the only thing that made sense. I was alive, but barely. A door clicked open somewhere beyond the curtain, and distant voices filtered through. My name floated in the air, soft and muffled. My heart jerked with hope. Maybe my parents had finally come. Maybe they were being rushed toward me, frantic, terrified, ready to hold my hand and ask what happened. Maybe this time I mattered, but then the words became clear and my stomach dropped so fast it felt like falling. Is Ryan's hand okay? It looked swollen after he hit her. My mother. Calm, concerned, worried. Not for me. For him. My father responded, his voice low but steady. They said they will take x-rays. He said it hurts to close his fist. His fist. The same fist that had slammed into my cheek so hard my vision went black. The same fist that had cracked against my ribs until something inside me shifted with a sickening snap. The same fist that had driven me into the floor, choking on my own blood. And now they were pacing outside an orthopedic urgent care room in the same medical campus while I lay on a table with tubes in my arms and alarms going off. They were feet away, and they had chosen to be with him. He should not have punched anything that hard, my mother whispered. Anything. Not anyone. Anything. The gurney jerked left, and agony ripped through my ribs so violently that I nearly blacked out again. A doctor lifted one eyelid with a gloved thumb, pupils sluggish, pulse unstable. She is losing volume. I wanted to speak to tell him that the pressure crushing my chest was not just bleeding or swelling, but years of being invisible, but my jaw trembled without sound. Blood pooled under my tongue and slid down my throat in a warm, metallic drip that made me gag. I forced myself to breathe through the mask, even though every inhale felt like someone was driving nails between my ribs. The curtain rustled again. Is the swelling going down? My mother asked, like Ryan had sprained a wrist and not nearly killed me. Poor Ryan. My father sighed. He must be in so much pain. I felt something deeper than bone break open inside me. My vision blurred again as the gurney was pushed toward imaging. The ceiling lights streaked across my eyes, long fluorescent blades slicing through the haze. Every time the wheels bumped over a tile seam, pain tore through me in a hot, violent wave that made my fingers curl uncontrollably against the sheet. A nurse leaned over me. "Elena, stay with me. Do not close your eyes." I tried to obey, but the voices outside kept cutting through the noise. Ryan groaning dramatically. My mother fussing over him. My father asking about his mobility. Not once did they ask where I was. Not once did they ask how badly I was hurt. Not once did they ask whether their daughter was bleeding out on a steel table. I had never felt so cold or so awake. Another sharp turn rattled the gurney, and I felt myself slipping, not into unconsciousness, but into a truth I had been afraid to see. If I died tonight, they would mourn the state of Ryan's hand before they mourned me. A whisper escaped me through the mask, thin as a thread. I am here. No one heard it. No one cared. and as the doors to imaging slammed open, a thought carved itself into me with the clarity of a blade. I was fighting for my life. They were worried about the hand that almost killed me. The beeping beside my head softened for a moment, as if the machine itself was pausing to let me feel the weight of what I had just heard, and when my eyes finally opened again, the room looked different, quieter, colder, like the ER had shifted into a new kind of reality where everything hurt and nothing made sense anymore. A nurse reached over me, adjusting the IV line and telling someone to prepare more fluids, but her voice drifted away as I felt my phone pressing faintly against my hip under the hospital gown where the EMTs had tucked it. My fingers shook violently as I dragged it up my body and into my hand. The screen was cracked from when Ryan slammed me into the kitchen counter, but it still lit up, and for reasons I cannot explain, except desperation, I pressed the one number that had meant protection my entire life. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice the same calm, unbothered tone she used when talking about grocery lists or weather updates. "What is it?" Elena Ryan is still being seen. For a second, I could not breathe at all. My ribs burned, my throat tightened, and a cold wave moved from my spine down to my fingertips. "Mom," I managed my voice barely air. "I am in the ER. I cannot breathe. I think my ribs are broken." He hit me. There was a pause, but it was not fear or worry. It was annoyance. "Elena, do not make this worse. Ryan is in pain too. You know how sensitive he is. You two always escalate each other." I stared at the ceiling, blinking back a blur of hot tears that instantly stung every cut on my face. Sensitive. She called him sensitive while I lay strapped to a table with blood drying down my neck and possible internal bleeding. "Mom, I need you," I whispered, and my voice cracked so sharply it hurt my own ears. "Please, come here." But she sighed, long and tired the way people sigh when their dinner order is wrong, not when their daughter is hemorrhaging. "We cannot leave him right now. He is very shaken up. You are strong, Elena. You will be fine." The call ended. The silence that followed was worse than any punch Ryan had thrown. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the metal rail. A nurse picked it up gently and asked, "Sweetheart, is someone coming for you?" Her eyes were soft, the kind of soft that only comes from seeing this kind of pain too often. I opened my mouth to lie because that is what I had always done to protect my family's image, but the truth pressed against my chest harder than the broken ribs. "No," I whispered. "Probably not." The nurse nodded in a way that told me she had seen daughters like me before. She tucked the phone beside me and squeezed my hand, not out of pity, but out of recognition, as if she understood the exact shape of this kind of abandonment. The emotional drop was so steep it felt like falling through the gurney and into the floor. Memories crashed in rapid images. My mother's voice dismissing my childhood fevers because Ryan had a headache, my father telling me not to cry after a bully broke my glasses because Ryan gets upset when he sees you, emotional years of birthdays, canceled milestones ignored, and holidays spent managing their golden son, while I stood quietly in the background pretending not to notice. A doctor stepped close, holding a portable ultrasound wand. "We need to check for fluid around the lungs." Cold gel spread across my side, and when he pressed the probe down, the pain tore a ragged scream from my throat. My vision dimmed and I tasted blood. When I could finally gasp again, he murmured to the nurse, "Possible small bleed. Monitor closely. She is very tender." Tender. A sanitized word for broken. Another wave of dizziness hit me, and my heart hammered too fast, alarms chirping in quick succession. "Elena, stay awake," the nurse said. She kept brushing hair from my forehead, careful not to touch the deep swelling spreading beneath my temple. "You are safe here." Focus on my voice. Safe. Except safety had always been the lie my family sold me, and now it collapsed completely under the weight of one truth: they did not care if I survived. As I lay there trembling, I heard my father's voice faintly through the wall, now even closer, like they had moved deeper into the building, but not toward me. "Make sure he gets ice for that hand. He said it hurts every time he moves it." The same hand that nearly killed me. Something inside me shifted not physically but emotionally, an awakening so sharp it felt like a fracture of its own. My family was not confused, overwhelmed, or misinformed. They had chosen him. They had always chosen him. And now, lying under fluorescent lights with blood pooling beneath my ribs, I finally saw the truth without excuses blurring the edges. I was not the daughter they protected. I was the daughter they expected to endure. The nurse returned with a warm blanket and tucked it around me, her kindness almost unbearable compared to the cold coming from the people who claimed to love me. She whispered, "You are not alone. Not tonight." But she was wrong. I was alone. Completely. And somehow that realization hurt worse than every cracked rib in my body. I used to believe that the night Ryan broke my ribs was the moment everything fell apart. But as I lay in that ER bed with machines keeping pace for the parts of my body that could no longer manage on their own, I realized the truth was older, quieter, and much more deeply rooted. It did not start with his fists. It began decades earlier in a small beige house on Sycamore Lane, where the foundation of our family was built unevenly, one child placed on a pedestal and the other beneath it. I was 6 the first time I understood that my worth was different from my brother's. Ryan threw a baseball straight through our living room window glass, exploding into tiny diamonds across the carpet. I remember covering my face with my hands, afraid that Mom would yell, afraid she would blame us both, but instead, she ran to him with worry flooding her voice. "Are you okay, honey? Did you get cut?" She touched his cheeks, checked his hands, kissed the top of his head while he shrugged and said he was fine. When she finally looked at me, it was only to say, "Elena, go get the broom. Your brother is shaken." Shaken. He was the one who threw the ball, but I swept silently because even then I knew arguing would change nothing. A few months later, I tripped on the back porch step and came down hard on my arm. The pain was blinding, immediate, sharp enough to make me cry out. Mom barely glanced up from the sink. "You are tough, sweetheart. You will be fine." Ryan wandered in moments later, complaining that he could not find his favorite toy fire truck, and suddenly, Mom was dropping everything, searching the house with frantic energy, as if that plastic truck was the only thing keeping the world upright. I sat there, holding my swelling arm against my chest, watching the two of them dig through cushions and cabinets while my elbow throbbed in purple waves. No one noticed the fracture until the school nurse called the next morning. Even then, Mom scolded me for not mentioning it because it made Ryan anxious. I learned early that pain only counted if it belonged to him. When we were 8 and 10, it was Ryan who threw tantrums loud enough to shake the hallway doors, slamming them so hard the pictures rattled. He would scream that he hated everyone, that life was unfair, that Mom was ruining his world by asking him to clean his room. Every time, Dad would kneel beside him murmuring, "Boys will be boys. He gets overwhelmed easily. Let him cool off." Meanwhile, I sat quietly on the staircase, clutching my knees, trying to make myself smaller so I would not upset anyone further. But quiet children in loud families do not get rewarded. They get forgotten. When I made honor roll for the first time in 3rd grade, I ran home with the certificate still warm from the printer. I held it out proudly, beaming, waiting for that moment of praise every child craves. Mom skimmed it for maybe 2 seconds before a crash sounded from the kitchen, where Ryan had knocked an entire stack of plates off the counter because dinner was not what he wanted. I stood in the doorway holding my certificate while Dad hugged Ryan, whispering, "It is okay, buddy. It is okay." My accomplishment went unnoticed, swallowed whole by his chaos. The older we got, the more obvious the roles became. Ryan was the sun, and our household orbited him. Every meltdown was a solar flare demanding full attention. Every disappointment was a gravity shift that pulled my parents tighter around him. I was the moon, distant, steady, expected to shine quietly without needing anything in return. I remember one Christmas when I was 9 and he was 11. He unwrapped a new bike, bright red with chrome handlebars reflecting the tree lights. He screamed in joy, riding it up and down the hallway while Mom filmed every second tears in her eyes from happiness. When it was my turn, I tore open a box to find a small sweater 2 sizes too big. "We thought you could grow into it," Mom said, distracted, as Ryan crashed into the dining room wall on his bike. They laughed about it for weeks. Years later, I realized that sweater was not a mistake. It was symbolic. Ryan got things he could grow with. I got things expected to fit later. In middle school, Ryan shoved a classmate so hard the boy fractured a tooth. Mom and Dad spent weeks defending him to the school, claiming he was sensitive, misunderstood, pressured by academic expectations. When I got shoved into a locker by a girl in gym class, Dad asked me, "Did Ryan see that happen?" It might upset him if he knows you are struggling. I started lying about everything: bad days, headaches, fear, loneliness. Anything that might disrupt their carefully constructed world where Ryan needed constant protection and I needed none. Even the night he split my eyebrow open with a plastic baseball bat during one of his fits, Mom pulled him into her arms, whispering, "He did not mean it, Elena. You know he loves you." I sat on the bathroom counter, pressing a towel to my bleeding face while Dad fetched Band-Aids and lectured me about not provoking him even when I had not spoken a single word. The message was consistent, and brutal Ryan's actions required excuses. Mine required endurance. The roots of this broken family tree twisted deeper each year until they shaped who I became. The compliant one, the invisible one, the strong one, the one who could always handle it while Ryan could not be expected to handle anything. And on the night I lay in the ER, listening to my parents fuss over the hand that had smashed into my ribs, I finally saw the full truth. Ryan was not the first one to hurt me. My parents were. They simply used him as the weapon. The older I grew, the more I tried to convince myself that things would eventually balance out. That one day my parents would wake up and see me not as an accessory to Ryan's life, but as their daughter, in my own right. Yet the years only sharpened the contrast between us until it felt like I lived behind a glass wall watching a family I technically belonged to but was never truly part of. I was 12 when the first deep crack formed in that fragile hope sitting on a folding chair in a crowded gym, buzzing with chatter and the squeak of polished shoes. It was the night of my scholarship ceremony, the culmination of months of studying, tutoring, and staying late after school. I wore a dress Mom had bought me 3 years earlier that still fit only because I barely grew that year. I scanned the crowd for my parents and Ryan, clutching the program in my sweaty hands, waiting for their faces to appear. But when my name was announced and applause rose around me, the 3 empty chairs in the third row stared back like a punch to the stomach. I smiled when I accepted the award, pretending nothing was wrong, and afterward I sat alone on the curb hugging my certificate while other families took pictures under the streetlights. When I finally walked home, the house was lit up and loud. Mom was on the phone with a nurse discussing Ryan's stomach pains, and Dad paced behind her holding a heating pad to his side, both of them too absorbed in his discomfort to notice the envelope in my hand. "We left early because Ryan needed us," Mom said, as if that excused everything, and Dad added that I could win another award next year, but Ryan had only one stomach. I ate dinner alone at the counter while they carried him to the couch and tucked him in like a fragile prince. That was the night I stopped expecting them to show up for me. A year later at school, I was shoved into a row of lockers by 3 girls during gym, the impact ringing through my skull and leaving my shoulder bruised for weeks. When I told Mom, she frowned only because she thought the incident might upset Ryan if he heard about it. "He is very sensitive to conflict. She said we should not burden him with this. Try to stay out of trouble." Okay? Out of trouble. As if being assaulted was a choice. When I approached Dad, hoping for a different reaction, he only asked, "Did anyone see?" Because if Ryan finds out, he might overreact, and that could cause problems. The lesson buried itself deep. My injuries were valuable only in relation to how they might affect him. Even pain was not mine to own. The older we became, the more the scale tipped toward absurdity. I joined the science club in 8th grade, pouring myself into a project about marine life that actually placed first in the district fair. Mom promised she would attend the showcase. Dad said he would try to get someone to cover his half shift so he could come too. On the day of the event, the auditorium lights were warm and hopeful, the tanks and poster boards lined up like tiny museums. While parents buzzed around proudly taking photos, my phone buzzed once with a text from Mom. "Ryan had a rough day. We will not make it. Take pictures." I took pictures, but none had me in them because there was no one there to hold the camera. I learned how to celebrate myself quietly, privately, because no moment belonged to me without being overshadowed by Ryan's needs, moods, or whims. High school only magnified the divide. When Ryan flunked 2 classes freshman year, Dad said school just was not his thing, and Mom said tests made him stressed. When I passed advanced biology with an A and earned early college credit, they nodded and said, "That is nice," as if it were a hobby rather than a step toward the future I desperately wanted. They did not ask about my dreams, my goals, my plans. Those questions were reserved for Ryan, even when he had none. One afternoon during my sophomore year, I came home with a twisted ankle from track practice. I limped into the kitchen and sat on a stool, hoping for a moment of attention. Dad looked over briefly and then turned to Ryan, who had earned a suspension for fighting a classmate. "We need to focus on helping him," Dad said, waving me off. "You are strong enough to handle a little sprain." That phrase had become their mantra. You are strong enough. You can handle it. You do not need us. But the truth is, no one is strong enough to be invisible forever. The emotional whiplash defined most of my teenage years. Whenever Ryan did something remotely positive, he was celebrated like a miracle. When he quit the basketball team because the coach told him to show up on time, Mom cried in the car about how unfair the world was to him. When I got selected as team captain for track the following year, they told me not to brag because Ryan is having a hard week. Any joy I experienced became something to hide so I would not upset him. During a family vacation to the coast when I was 17, Ryan threw a tantrum on the hotel balcony because the restaurant downstairs did not serve the exact meal he wanted. Mom spent hours soothing him while Dad tried to negotiate with the kitchen staff. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the sunset through the window, wondering why I always had to be the quiet one, the understanding one, the one who stepped aside. I wanted to scream, to demand to be seen, but even then I knew it would only end with them consoling him and telling me I was being dramatic. The cycle was so predictable it became a script etched into the walls of our home. By the time I left for college, I should have felt free, but instead, I carried a cold, hollow ache with me, an emptiness shaped like a family I never truly had. Because as much as I wanted to believe things would get better, every early wound had already taught me the truth. My life was theirs to ignore. My needs were theirs to dismiss. And my pain was never as urgent, important, or deserving as the feelings of the son they worshipped. If I had understood that fully back then, maybe I would not have answered the phone the night everything shattered. Maybe I would not have walked into the house where decades of imbalance were waiting to erupt. But trauma has a way of pulling you back to the place it began, and mine had always begun with them. Money was never just money in my family. It was a language, a weapon, a leash, and most of all, a mirror reflecting exactly who mattered and who did not. By the time I turned 18, I had already learned that love in our house came with price tags and conditions, and every one of those conditions tilted in Ryan's favor. While other kids my age worried about prom dresses or summer jobs, I spent my weekends filling out financial aid forms and scholarship essays because college was a dream I would have to build entirely on my own. My parents claimed they could not afford to help me, yet that same year they surprised Ryan with a brand new car for his 17th birthday, complete with a giant red bow on the hood. I remember running my hand along the glossy paint while he revved the engine in the driveway, bragging to his friends that he deserved something nice after such a stressful year. He had been suspended twice, quit one job after 3 days, and totaled his previous car by racing down Sycamore Lane, but none of that mattered. Mom and Dad stood proudly beside him, talking about how a good vehicle will help him stay on track. Meanwhile, my acceptance letter to the state university sat on the coffee table, ignored, unopened by anyone but me. The next blow came when I asked if they could help cover part of my textbooks for my first semester. They shared a sympathetic look, the same one they used when telling neighbors about Ryan's struggles, and Dad gently explained that money was tight. I believed him until Ryan mentioned later that night that he and Dad were considering upgrading the sound system in his new car. I picked up extra shifts at the diner that semester working until my legs ached, then coming home to study with my feet in a bucket of ice water. Ryan, on the other hand, drifted from part-time job to part-time job, quitting whenever someone corrected him or expected him to show up on time. He has trouble with authority, Mom would say, as though authority itself was the villain in Ryan's life. When he overdrafted his bank account 3 months in a row, Dad opened a second account under his own name to help manage things, and I listened quietly from the stairs as they reassured him that none of it was his fault. I had one overdraft my entire freshman year and spent a week crying over the $35 fee while my parents told me I needed to budget better. The truth was, I already did. I just had no safety net. Everything changed the year my parents refinanced the house. I was 24 by then, working full-time as a radiologic technologist, proud of the independence I had finally carved out for myself. I paid my own rent, my own car, my own utilities, every bill handled with precision because I knew no help was coming. When Dad called and asked me to stop by the house one evening, I thought maybe they wanted dinner or company. Instead, I found a stack of documents spread across the dining table and my parents beaming as if delivering good news. "We are refinancing," Dad said, pushing a pen toward me. "Interest rates are dropping, and the bank said it would go smoother with another strong name on the loan." Strong name. That was what I was to them, a financial tool, an asset, not a daughter. I hesitated explaining that I was not comfortable signing something I did not fully understand, but Dad's face clouded instantly, the same disappointed look he gave Ryan whenever the world asked too much of him. "It is just a formality, Elena. It will not affect you at all. You know your brother could never co-sign something like this with his credit," Mom added softly. "Please, this will really help the family." And there it was, again, the invisible weight placed on my shoulders, the expectation that I would carry responsibility because Ryan could not. I signed because the guilt settled like a knot in my throat, and because part of me still believed helping them meant they might one day help me too. That illusion shattered 6 months later when the first property tax notice arrived addressed to both my father and me. I asked him why my name was listed on the billing statement, and he brushed it off with a laugh. "It is just the way the system works. You do not need to worry about it." Except he did not pay it. He never paid it. When the second notice arrived with a late fee attached, Mom called me crying about how unexpected medical expenses for Ryan had drained their savings. He had sprained his wrist lifting weights incorrectly. I paid the bill because I panicked at the thought of the house being penalized, or worse, them blaming me for not helping. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, but a year later I found myself covering half the taxes annually without a single thank you, simply because I was the dependable one. Ryan, meanwhile, bounced from job to job, always landing back at the house, always cushioned by their money and patience. When his car was impounded after a DUI, Dad raided his retirement fund to get it back, claiming if we do not help him, he will spiral. When I needed a new pair of work shoes because mine were splitting at the seams, Mom told me to wait until next paycheck. Over time, the financial strain became a second heartbeat in my life, constant and draining. I was the emergency fund, the backup plan, the reliable safety net for a family that did not even bother pretending to support me in return. Each dollar I paid felt like another piece of myself being chipped away, another reminder that no matter how hard I worked or how responsible I would always be the daughter expected to lift the weight while Ryan was the son who never carried anything at all. Looking back, signing that mortgage was not the mistake. Believing they would ever treat me as an equal was. And when I lay in the ER listening to them fret over Ryan's injured hand instead of my broken body, I finally understood that their financial exploitation had never been about money. It had always been about value. His was limitless. Mine was disposable. The day everything cracked did not arrive with warning sirens or dramatic thunder. It came disguised as an ordinary Tuesday, the kind where people in my neighborhood watered their lawns. Kids dragged backpacks across sidewalks, and I drove home from a 12-hour hospital shift thinking only about reheating leftover pasta and collapsing into bed. I remember the sunset bleeding orange over the freeway, the steady hum of my engine soothing after hours of listening to cardiac monitors and trauma alarms. For a moment, life felt quiet, manageable, like maybe the world had softened its grip on me. Then my phone buzzed 3 times in rapid succession. The caller ID made my stomach tense before I even answered Mom. Calls from her rarely meant good news. I pressed speaker and her voice rushed through the car like wind through a cracked window. "Elena, you need to come over." "It is Ryan. He is not doing well." Not doing well could have meant anything with Ryan. It could mean he was sad, angry hungover, bored hungry, or annoyed by the existence of gravity. Before I could respond, she added, "Your brother lost his job again. His manager said he got physical with a coworker." He is very upset. We cannot calm him down. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. This was the third job he had been fired from in less than a year. I asked gently, "Is anyone hurt?" Mom inhaled, sharply offended. "Why does that matter right now, Elena? Your brother is devastated." The words landed like pebbles hitting an old bruise. Ryan's devastation had always outweighed everything else, even other people's injuries, even mine. I forced myself to stay calm. "What exactly do you need me to do?" There was a shuffle on the other end, as if she was covering the phone to hush someone before she responded. "You know he listens to you. He always has. You are the only one who can talk him down." That sentence made something deep inside me twist painfully because it was both true and false at the same time. Ryan did not listen to me. He tolerated me for brief seconds before dismissing my existence entirely. But my parents believed their own version of reality. So I had spent years walking into rooms where he raged like a storm and trying to be the lightning rod that absorbed everything quietly. Part of me wanted to say no, to tell her I had just finished a grueling shift, that I was exhausted, starving, and barely holding myself upright. But I heard shouting in the background, something slamming, and my father's voice rising in panic. Habit took over before logic could intervene. "I am on my way," I said. The words tasted like resignation. The drive to my parents' house felt longer than usual, the streetlights stretching like blurred spears through my tired eyes. I pulled into the familiar driveway, noticing immediately that the front door was wide open. That was never a good sign. I stepped inside, slowly bracing myself. The smell hit me first, spilled beer, burnt food, and the sour tang of sweat. Ryan's voice boomed from the kitchen, mixing rage with a kind of helplessness that always managed to trigger my parents' deepest instincts to coddle him. "Nothing works out for me. Everyone pushes me. Everyone hates me." Another loud crash shattered through the house. I hurried toward the kitchen and found Mom standing near the counter, wringing her hands, Dad hovering behind her with a dish towel pressed to his arm, from where Ryan had apparently knocked over a jar that shattered. Ryan stood in the middle of the kitchen, pacing like a trapped animal face. Red eyes wild, a mostly empty beer bottle clutched in his hand. The trash can had been kicked over, cabinet doors were hanging open, and food was splattered across the tile. Mom rushed toward me, relief flooding her face. "Thank God. Maybe he will calm down now that you are here." Dad added, "Just talk to him. He respects you." That was the biggest lie of all. Ryan stopped pacing long enough to glare at me as if I were the source of every disappointment in his life. "You. Always you," he snarled. "You think you are better than me because you have a job and a life and everyone likes you." I took a steadying breath, trying to keep my voice soft. "Ryan, no one is against you. Losing a job is hard, but we can figure things out." He stepped closer, the beer bottle dangling dangerously from his fingers. "Figure things out like you always do. Miss Perfect Fix-It." He mimicked my tone with a sneer. "You think you are the hero around here." My chest tightened and I raised my hands in a calming gesture. "I am just trying to help." He slammed the bottle against the counter and glass shattered into glittering shards across the tile. Mom gasped and Dad threw an arm in front of her. Ryan pointed at me, shaking with fury. "You think you are so calm, so controlled, and everyone treats you like the golden one, but it is all your fault. Everything is your fault. Golden one." The irony hit me like a slap. I felt the shift in the air, the thinning tension before something breaks. His face twisted into something I had not seen since we were kids, an expression raw and unrestrained. A warning flashed through my mind, but exhaustion weighed down my limbs. I should have backed away. I should have left. I should have let them deal with the fire they created. But decades of conditioning made me stand there waiting, trying to help, trying to fix. I whispered, "Ryan, please just breathe." His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists, and the world that had been cracking beneath my feet for years finally split open. The moment Ryan's eyes locked onto mine, something in the air changed. thickened like the house itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable eruption, and I felt a chill sweep across my spine, even though the kitchen was warm from the oven they had forgotten to turn off hours earlier. He stepped toward me slowly at first, shoulders rising and falling with erratic breaths, his fingers flexing as if his body was winding itself up for the violence it had always been capable of but had rarely unleashed so openly. For a split second, I thought about stepping back, about putting distance between us, but my parents were behind me, and the doorway was blocked by the overturned trash can, and before I could move, Ryan's voice cut sharply through the thick air. "You think you are better than me?" he growled, pacing in a half circle like a predator deciding the angle of attack. "Everyone always thinks you are so damn perfect." His words vibrated with the same bitterness I had heard all my life. But there was something more feral in them now, something that made my pulse spike. I kept my hands raised, palms open, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ryan, I am not your enemy. Please just take a breath." But reason was gasoline in his world, not water. He snapped. He grabbed the nearest object, a wooden cutting board off the counter, and hurled it across the room. It smacked the cabinet door next to my head so hard the hinges rattled and Mom shrieked, clutching her chest. Dad reached for Ryan, but Ryan shoved him away with a force that nearly knocked him into the table. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, each beat a sharp, blooming pain from the injuries I did not know I already had. Ryan lunged toward me, shoving me backward. I stumbled over a shard of broken glass from the beer bottle he had smashed earlier, catching myself on the counter, but he was on me before I could regain balance. His fist came at me faster than my brain could process. The punch connected with the side of my jaw so violently that my vision burst into white static, and a metallic taste flooded my mouth. My head whipped sideways, pain exploding from my ear down my neck, and I felt the warm trickle of blood inside my cheek where my teeth cut into the flesh. "Ryan, stop!" Mom screamed, but her voice sounded far away underwater. He did not stop. He swung again this time, catching my ribcage with a force so brutal that a popping crack echoed inside me. I gasped the air vanishing from my lungs like someone had punched a hole through them. My knees buckled and I dropped to the floor. One hand clutching my ribs, the other pressed against the tile to stop the spinning. "You ruin everything!" he roared, his voice raw with rage. "You make me feel small." I tried to crawl backward, but the slick floor made my hand slide and my body twisted awkwardly. Ryan's shadow loomed over me, the roar of his breathing filling my ears. "Don't," I wheezed, but the word barely escaped my lips. He kicked the cabinet door beside my head, making the entire kitchen shake. I flinched instinctively, curling in protectively, but he grabbed my shoulder and yanked me upward before slamming me back down onto the tile. Stars exploded across my vision. A loud buzzing filled my ears. My skin prickled with cold. Somewhere behind him, Dad yelled his name, trying to intervene, but Ryan spun around and shoved him back again, sending him stumbling into a chair. Mom cried out, but did not move closer. She never did. Then the blow that changed everything shattered through me. Ryan lunged down and drove his fist directly into my right side, right below my ribs, the impact so devastating it felt like a metal bat hitting bone. A sickening snap echoed inside my body, followed by a pain so violent it stole every trace of oxygen. My scream came out as a choked gurgle as I collapsed sideways onto my arm. Something shifted beneath my skin, a grinding sensation that made my stomach twist with nausea. I knew instantly something was broken. My ribs, maybe more. The tile felt ice cold against my cheek as I lay there struggling to breathe, each inhale fractured and shallow. My heartbeat thudded unevenly, the edges of the room blurring. "Look what you made me do!" Ryan shouted, shaking his hand as if the impact had hurt him more than me. He flexed his fingers, grimacing. "Damn it, that hurts!" Mom rushed toward him, immediately grabbing his wrist, inspecting his knuckles as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Oh, sweetheart, your hand is swelling," she cried. "Elena, why would you provoke him like this?" I stared up from the floor, barely conscious, unable to speak. unable to understand how she could look at him instead of me. Blood dripped from my temple, sliding across the tile, and I tasted copper with every breath. Ryan cradled his injured hand against his chest, whining in pain. I think I messed it up. It is throbbing. Dad grabbed an ice pack from the freezer and pressed it to his hand, saying, "We need to get this looked at. Get this looked at." I lay broken on the floor, gasping for breath, and they were planning to take him to urgent care. I tried to push myself up, but my arm collapsed under me, sending another shock of pain through my ribs. The world flickered, darkening around the edges, and I felt the cold creeping deeper. "Mom," I whispered, but she did not hear me, or she did not care. Her back was turned. Ryan shook his hand again and hissed in pain. "I cannot even move it," he muttered. Mom kissed his forehead, brushing his hair back. "We will take care of you, honey. Let us get you to a doctor." Dad looked at me on the floor for half a second, expression tight, annoyed. "Elena, get up. Do not be dramatic. We need to go." My vision warped, the ceiling lights stretching into long streaks. I tried to speak, but only a weak gasp escaped. Before anyone could notice, before anyone even checked if I was breathing, the front door opened. A voice called out sharply, "Is everyone okay in here?" It was Avery, the neighbor, drawn over by the noise. She stepped inside just in time to see me crumpled on the floor, and her eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God! Elena," she shouted. "She needs an ambulance right now." That was the moment my parents finally turned around and realized I was not moving. But by then, it was already too late. The explosion had happened. The damage was done. And as everything went dark, one thought carved itself deep into me. Ryan broke my bones, but my parents broke my spirit long before his fists ever did. The strange thing about hitting the floor that night was how ordinary it felt at first, like my body had simply detached from the chaos around me and slipped into a muffled world where sound and movement came through thick and distorted, but the pain was anything but distant. It pulsed through me in violent waves, radiating from my ribs to my spine until I could barely inhale without feeling the edges of broken bone grinding inside my chest. My vision had narrowed to a thin, trembling tunnel, but even through that shrinking clarity, I could see my parents hovering over Ryan as if he were the true victim sprawled across the kitchen, not the woman curled in a growing pool of her own blood. Mom's voice broke through the ringing in my ears first. "Honey, does it hurt when you move your fingers?" She cradled Ryan's injured hand like it was an endangered relic and not the very weapon that had just shattered half my rib cage. Dad hovered beside her, fumbling with the frozen gel pack he had wrapped in a dish towel, pressing it carefully to Ryan's swollen knuckles, while completely ignoring the gurgled breath that escaped my throat. I could not speak. I could not lift my head. But I could hear everything, including Ryan whining. "It feels like something tore." She made me hit her too hard. The words sank into me like poisoned needles. He made himself the victim, and they believed him without hesitation. Avery, the neighbor, stepped farther into the doorway, her expression tightening with fear as she took in the sight of me helpless on the floor. "She needs an ambulance right now," she snapped, but my parents waved her back as if she were interrupting a private emergency. "She is overreacting," Dad muttered while adjusting the ice pack on Ryan's hand. "Avery, please stay out of this." But Avery ignored him, kneeling beside me and brushing bloody strands of hair from my forehead. "Elena, can you hear me?" "Honey, look at me." I tried to respond, but only a wet rasp escaped, and the look in Avery's eyes told me she understood something was very wrong. She raised her voice this time. "She cannot breathe properly. Her ribs might be broken." "You need to call 911. Mom finally glanced over her shoulder at me, but only for a second, barely masking her irritation. "Avery, you are making this worse. She will be fine. She always is. But Ryan's hand is swelling more. He could have fractured it." Avery straightened up, hands shaking outrage, sharpening her voice. "Her ribs could be puncturing her lung. Do you understand that? She could die?" Dad stiffened, as if the word die offended him more than the fact that his daughter was half-conscious on the tile. "She is strong," he said with a dismissive wave, "and she needs to stop causing scenes." I wanted to scream, but the pain locked my body in place. Every breath clicked with a faint squelch deep in my chest, and my skin grew clammy as cold sweat spread across my forehead. Avery whipped out her phone and dialed anyway. "I am calling 911. They can decide what is a scene." Mom rushed toward her, but Avery held up a firm hand. "Do not touch me. I am doing what you should have done 10 minutes ago." Within minutes, the house filled with the distant but growing wail of sirens, but even then, my parents did not move toward me. Instead, they pulled Ryan toward the door, preparing to take him to the urgent care clinic down the street, fussing over his hand as though he were an injured child. When the EMTs burst through the door, Avery pointed immediately. "She is here." She was beaten, hard. The EMTs knelt beside me, checking my pulse oxygen responsiveness, and everything about their urgency felt foreign after years of being treated like the least important person in my own family. Possible rib fracture, shallow breathing, declining oxygen. "We need her on the stretcher now," one of them called. Dad stepped forward, annoyed. "We need to leave. Our son has to get his hand looked at." The EMT paused mid-motion, staring at him in disbelief. "Sir, your daughter's injuries are severe. She needs immediate transport." Mom shook her head. She fell. "It is not as bad as it looks. Ryan needs us. He is shaken." The EMT stared at her like she had spoken another language. "Ma'am, she did not fall. Someone hit her. Hard. We need to get her to the ER." As they lifted me onto the stretcher, the pain ripped through me like lightning, and a sob broke from my chest. Avery squeezed my hand, whispering, "You are going to be okay. I am here." I looked toward the doorway, hoping for one last sign that my parents cared, but they did not even watch the EMTs carry me out. Mom wrapped her arm around Ryan, guiding him toward their car. "Come on, sweetheart, let us take care of your hand." Dad locked the door behind them without a glance in my direction. The EMT asked loudly, "Which hospital should we tell them to meet us at?" Dad called back over his shoulder, irritated. "We will be at Glenview Urgent Care. His hand needs X-rays." His hand. Not my ribs, not my skull, not my life. As the ambulance doors slammed shut and the sirens roared to life, the last thing I saw through the narrow back window was my parents leading Ryan to their car like royalty, as though I were a stranger instead of their daughter. And that was the moment I realized that being left on the floor was not a mistake. It was who they had always been. The ambulance rattled beneath me as it sped through the neighborhood, the fluorescent lights above my head flickering in and out like my consciousness was tethered to a dying bulb, but through every flash of pain, every shallow breath that scraped against what remained of my ribs, one constant presence steadied me, Avery's hand gripping mine. She had climbed into the back before anyone could tell her not to. Her face, pale but resolute jaw, tight with anger that was not directed at me, but for me, something so foreign it almost hurt worse than the broken bones. "You hold on, okay? You just hold on," she whispered, leaning close as the EMT placed the oxygen mask over my face, adjusting the strap so gently it almost made me want to cry. The EMT checked my vitals again, his voice serious. "She is tachycardic, oxygen still low, possible internal bleed." Avery's grip tightened even more. "Do you hear that, Elena? They are taking care of you. You are safe now. You are not alone." The words slipped through the chaos like warm water through cracks in ice, melting something inside me I did not even know had gone numb. No one had ever said I was not alone. Not once in 29 years. My parents had always made me feel like needing help was an inconvenience, like being hurt was an exaggeration, like being afraid was weakness. But here was a woman who had known me for only a handful of casual, neighborly conversations, holding my hand as if her life depended on keeping me tethered to mine. The EMT lifted the side of my shirt to examine the deep spreading bruise across my ribs. Avery inhaled sharply at the sight, her eyes burning with tears she tried to disguise as fury. "How long has this been happening?" she demanded, but the EMT only shook his head. "Let the doctors ask questions later." I tried to speak, but the mask muffled everything and pain wrapped around my lungs like barbed wire. Avery leaned close again. "Elena, if you can hear me, listen carefully. What happened tonight was not your fault, not any of it. You did not deserve this. You never deserved any of it. A trembling breath escaped me, fogging the inside of the mask. I could not remember the last time someone defended me without expecting something in return. My heart ached in a way that had nothing to do with injury. She is going to crash if we do not stabilize her soon, the EMT said, placing an IV line and preparing fluids. Avery watched every motion like a hawk guarding a wounded creature, her posture coiled with protective rage. "Do you have someone to call?" the EMT asked her. Avery shook her head sharply. "Her parents are with him," she said, bitterness dripping from every syllable. "They are worried about his hand." The EMT paused, incredulous. Her hand. No. Avery snapped his. His hand. The one he used to do this to her. Something dark flickered in the EMT's expression, the kind of disgust reserved for cruelty that defies basic human instinct. "We will note that," he said quietly. The ambulance jerked as it made a sharp turn, and the sudden movement sent a bolt of agony up my side, so intense I thought I might pass out then and there. Avery reached up and steadied my shoulder, her touch feather light. "Breathe with me," she whispered. "In. Slow. Out. Slow. You are doing so well." Her voice was the anchor I clung to. I followed its rhythm like a terrified child clinging to a lantern in the dark. I had never realized until that moment how desperately I wanted someone, anyone, to care enough to sit beside me while I broke apart. When the ambulance finally screeched to a halt outside the ER, the back doors swung open and a team of nurses surged forward. Avery stepped aside just long enough for them to lift me, but followed so closely they did not even question it. The bright hospital lights hit my eyes like a flashbang, and I blinked hard, my breath hitching as the gurney rushed through hallways filled with the scent of antiseptic and distant voices echoing off tile floors. A nurse called out, "Female, late 20s, blunt force trauma, respiratory distress, suspected rib fractures, possible internal bleeding, and hearing my injuries stated plainly hit harder than any punch." It was real, all of it, and I had survived long enough to hear it. Avery leaned over me again as they wheeled me into a trauma bay. "I am not going anywhere," she promised. "Not until I know you are safe." Her voice trembled slightly, but her determination did not. For the first time in my life, someone was choosing to stay. Not because they had to, not because it was convenient, but because they cared. In that moment, with pain swallowing my breath and fear clinging to every bone, a truth settled inside me with quiet certainty. Sometimes the people who save you are not the ones who share your blood. They are the ones who show up when blood turns its back. And Avery had shown up. Fully. Fiercely. Completely. As the room spun and my vision blurred again, I felt her hand slip into mine one more time. "I am here," she whispered. The words followed me into the darkness like a promise I had never known I needed. The chaos of the trauma bay softened into a steadier rhythm as the initial emergency passed monitors steadying into regulated beeps while nurses moved with practiced precision around me. But beneath the oxygen mask and the ache that radiated through every bone in my body, something new began to take shape, a sense of presence of people gathering, not out of obligation, but out of genuine concern, a feeling so foreign it made my throat tighten more than the pain. Nurse Jasmine was the first to step fully into that space, a woman in her early 40s with warm brown eyes and a calm that wrapped around me like a blanket. She examined my injuries with a quiet focus, her hands gentle but confident as she cleaned the blood along my jaw and wrapped the bruised, swelling curve of my ribs. "This was not a fall," she said softly, not accusing me, but acknowledging reality in a way that made tears burn behind my eyes. When I failed to answer, her voice softened even more. "You do not have to explain anything tonight. What matters is that you are safe now." Safe. The word felt undeserved, yet her tone made me wonder if maybe for once it was true. Avery stayed at the foot of the bed, arms folded tightly across her chest, eyes tracking every person who entered as if daring anyone to dismiss or minimize what had happened to me. When Jasmine glanced at her, Avery introduced herself in a voice still edged with raw anger. "I am her neighbor. I witnessed enough to know she did not fall. Her brother attacked her. Badly." Jasmine nodded, not surprised, not shocked, just resolute. We will document everything, she assured. It was the first time anyone in a medical setting had treated my pain as fact instead of exaggeration, and the relief was so intense I almost felt dizzy. A doctor ordered CT scans and additional imaging. Avery walked alongside the gurney as they pushed me through the halls, making sure no one left me alone. Every time a spasm of pain tightened my chest, she placed her hand on the railing near my head and whispered fiercely, "I am not going anywhere. I do not care who shows up or who does not." When they slid me into the CT machine, the cold tunnel felt claustrophobic and endless, but I kept my focus on Avery through the small glass window, her face pressed close to the glass, watching every second like she could hold my bones together by sheer will. After the scans, when they wheeled me back into a private observation room, I spotted Jasmine again typing notes into the chart. She looked up with a steady expression that felt like a lifeline. "I have seen cases like yours," she said, her voice lowering. "People who were never protected by the ones who were supposed to love them the most. It is not your fault. None of it." Something inside me cracked open at those words, and an involuntary sob broke from my chest, a sound that startled even me. Jasmine placed her hand on my arm and let me cry without looking uncomfortable or impatient, and for the first time that night the pain felt survivable. A moment later, she asked gently, "Do you have anyone we can call a friend, a coworker, anyone you trust?" My mind raced through the list and stalled. The people I worked with were kind but distant. My parents were across the building with Ryan. There was no one else. But then a name surfaced through the fog, a lifeline from another painful chapter of my life. "May," I whispered through the stiffness of my jaw. "May Whitmore, my old attorney." Jasmine brightened. "Good. A lawyer is good. Do you want us to contact her?" I nodded, and Avery immediately stepped forward. "Give me the number. I will call." Within minutes, Avery had May on the line. I heard her firm voice even through the haze of pain, calm and authoritative, asking about my condition, whether the police had been notified what the medical team had documented so far. Her tone carried the same protective edge she used years ago when she defended me in a property dispute I never should have been dragged into. "Tell her I will be there first thing in the morning," May instructed, "and tell her she is not fighting this alone anymore." Avery repeated the message word for word, and the reassurance washed over me like warm light. After the call, Jasmine returned with fresh ice packs and checked the readings on my monitors. "Your oxygen is stabilizing," she told me. "You are bruised badly, and we need to wait for final CT results, but you are not in danger for now." She gave me a soft smile. "Rest. You are surrounded by people who care." The words clung to me. Surrounded. Care. Allies. I had spent my entire life believing I only had myself, that I could survive anything as long as I kept quiet, kept still, kept adapting to whatever storm Ryan created. But now there were 3 women around me. Avery, the fierce witness Jasmine, the steady protector May, the strategist with a spine of steel, and their presence made the room feel different, lighter, grounded. Avery pulled a chair right next to my bed and sat so close I could hear the steady rhythm of her breathing. "Elena," she whispered, eyes softening, "I know you do not believe this yet, but tonight is the last time you ever face this alone." I stared at her, at Jasmine, at the space where May would soon stand, and despite the pain twisting through my ribs, something new flickered inside me, a fragile but unmistakable spark of possibility. Maybe the people meant to save me never would, but the people who chose to save me already had. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough to fight for. The dim hospital room hummed with the low, mechanical heartbeat of machines, a steady pulse beneath the weight of my own unsteady breaths, and as the pain meds settled into my bloodstream, blurring the edges of agony just enough for thought to form clearly, something inside me shifted for the first time in 32 years, a feeling not born of fear or grief, but of stark, electric awakening. I stared at the ceiling tiles, each small perforation a silent reminder of how many nights I had spent trying to rationalize a family that had never once chosen me, of how many times I had interpreted neglect as strength, favoritism as fragility, and abuse as just how things are, because admitting the truth meant admitting I had been alone my entire life. Now, in the sterile glow of the trauma wing, with Jasmine's quiet footsteps fading down the hall, and Avery's silhouette resting in the chair by my bed, the truth pressed in with undeniable force. I thought of every time I had been blamed for Ryan's temper, every time my parents had asked if I really needed to make a scene, every time they had reframed my pain into an inconvenience, my fear into dramatics, my accomplishments into afterthoughts, and I felt my chest tighten with a different kind of pain. Not the cracked rib stabbing between my breaths, but the emotional fracture finally splitting open. As I replayed the memory of Ryan's fists, the sound of bone hitting bone, the shock in his voice when his hand screamed in pain louder than I did, I realized with stunning clarity that if I had died on that kitchen floor, my parents would have mourned the inconvenience to his future more than the end of my life. They had made that clear tonight with every word they spoke, every step they took toward him instead of me. The realization was ugly, sharp enough to slice through the numbness, but there was something liberating in it too, because truth, even painful truth, is cleaner than denial. It asks less of you. It does not demand that you twist yourself into knots to make sense of cruelty. As the monitors beeped, I let myself drift back through memory after memory, each one snapping into place like evidence I had been too afraid to assemble. I remembered being 9, trying to show my mother a drawing I had made only for her to brush past me because Ryan had scraped his knee outside. I remembered being 15 studying for finals at the kitchen table when Ryan punched a hole in the drywall because his coach benched him and my father spent the evening comforting him while I plastered the sheetrock myself. I remembered Ryan's first DUI and how my parents drained my college savings to pay for his lawyer, insisting you will understand when you have children of your own. I remembered every apology I had swallowed, every favor I had done, every quiet sacrifice that had been met with silence or expectation instead of love. And tonight, watching them choose him again with zero hesitation, I finally understood the pattern was not temporary, not circumstantial, not a rough patch. It was the architecture of my family. I had been born into a system where my survival depended on my silence, where being the strong one meant being unprotected, where being self-sufficient meant being ignored. And lying here now, bandaged and broken, yet finally honest with myself, I felt something inside me resolve with a clarity that startled even me. I would not die their scapegoat. I would not live that way either. I inhaled slowly, the pain sharp but grounding, and turned my head slightly to see Avery asleep in the chair, chin tucked to her chest, still wearing the jacket she had rushed over in. She was not blood. Neither was Jasmine. Neither was May. Yet they had shown up without hesitation. They had believed me without questioning my tone or my timing. They had stayed fiercely and without agenda. In them, I saw something I had not recognized until now, the truth that love is proven in presence, not in proximity. Blood is biology. Care is choice. And I was done choosing people who never chose me back. When I closed my eyes again, a new voice rose inside me, steady and uncompromising. Enough! Enough pretending things will get better if I just endure one more insult, one more injury, one more sacrifice. Enough letting their narrative define my worth. Enough covering for Ryan's violence and my parents' cowardice. Enough accepting that my pain must remain invisible so their comfort can remain intact. If I survived the night, I would not survive it quietly. I would not let them rewrite this. I would not let them twist the truth into another story where my fear became overreaction and Ryan's brutality became stress. I would not let the people who abandoned me at my most vulnerable decide how this chapter ended. As the early tremors of dawn crept across the hallway floors and monitors blinked with renewed rhythm, that vow solidified into something immovable, something fierce. I would gather every piece of evidence. I would let May bulldoze through the legal maze they built around me. I would break the financial chains they quietly looped around my name. I would build a life that no longer required my silence as currency. And most of all, I would finally allow myself to walk away, not in shame, not in fear, but in clarity. For the first time in my life, I understood that leaving was not cruelty. Staying had been. Enough was enough. Morning seeped into the hospital room in thin, pale ribbons brushing against the bruises on my skin, like a hesitant apology from a world that had watched me suffer in silence for too long. and as consciousness settled over me with a dull but determined ache, I knew the time for hoping things would magically get better had ended. Now came the part where I gathered everything my family had spent decades erasing and turned it into a truth they could not escape. My ribs protested when I pushed myself slightly upright, but the pain only sharpened my focus, grounding me in what I had to do next. May arrived just after sunrise, her navy blazer crisp, her steps clipped and purposeful, her eyes filled with both concern and unmistakable fire. She stood at the foot of my bed and studied me not like someone broken, but like someone preparing for battle. "We need to start now," she said gently but firmly, before they try to twist the narrative. I nodded, swallowing the tremor in my throat. "Tell me what to do." May pulled out a tablet, unlocked it with a tap, and laid out the process with the clarity of a surgeon preparing an operating room. "We need documentation of everything: photos, scans, medical notes, timestamps, voicemails, texts. Anything that shows a pattern, not just an incident." She looked me straight in the eye. "This case will not rely on emotion. It will rely on evidence. And you have more than you think." Her confidence steadied me, and as Jasmine entered to check my vitals, May asked if the hospital could provide digital copies of my scans. Jasmine nodded immediately. "Absolutely. Trauma cases automatically generate a full image archive: CT scans, X-rays, notes." She glanced at me with a softness I was still learning how to accept. "And Elena, the photos will speak louder than their excuses." Jasmine dimmed the overhead light slightly and helped me turn my torso so she could photograph the bruises that wrapped around my ribs like dark planetary rings, the swelling across my cheekbone, the stitches along my scalp. Each shutter sound felt like a small hammer striking the wall of denial that had caged me for years. I asked her to take close-ups of the fingerprint bruises on my upper arm, the sickening echo of Ryan's grip, and the deep purple blotch that marked where his final punch had knocked me to the floor. Jasmine handled the camera with striking gentleness. "Most people never report these things," she murmured. "But you are." That simple acknowledgement almost made my throat close. When she stepped out, May helped me scroll through the images on the tablet. Seeing myself like that broken, battered evidence of brutality carved into every inch of my skin made something inside me recoil, but it also solidified my resolve. This was not exaggeration. This was not drama. This was harm, intentional harm, and someone had to answer for it. Next, May instructed me to open my voicemail. My hands shook slightly as I pulled up the message from my mother, the one she left while I was lying in the trauma bay fighting to breathe. "Do not make this worse. Ryan is hurting too." Hearing it again, echoing cold and dismissive in the brightly lit hospital room, ignited a heat in my chest that cut through every layer of pain. May replayed it twice, jaw tightening. "This is gold," she said. "This shows coercion, minimization, blame shifting. Exactly the pattern I expected." She saved the voicemail to the evidence folder and asked me to go through my texts. Message after message filled the screen, my parents asking me to cover Ryan's rent just until he stabilizes my father complaining that I should stop provoking him. My mother insisting he does not mean it all, while never once acknowledging the toll their requests had taken on me. May documented every thread, every timestamp. "This is a financial timeline of exploitation," she explained, "and it will support breaking the mortgage tie." The mortgage. My stomach twisted as the memory resurfaced, sitting at my parents' kitchen table 2 years ago, pen in hand, signing documents I did not fully understand because my father told me it is just paperwork. May tapped her pen against the tablet. "I will file for immediate financial disentanglement. You will no longer be legally tied to their home or debt, and they will no longer have access to your stability." Hearing those words felt like oxygen filling a lung that had collapsed years ago. The next step was the hardest. May needed a verbal statement from me to accompany the police report she would help file. Cameras and screens were one thing. Speaking the reality aloud was another. My hands twisted in the hospital blanket as I began. "He punched me," I whispered. "Over and over." I told him to stop. I fell. I hit the counter. I could not breathe. I thought I was going to die. May typed calmly, carefully, without interrupting. My parents said they had to take him to urgent care. They left me on the floor. They did not come in the ambulance. She typed faster now. And when they called, I continued voice cracking. They asked me not to make it worse for him. May finally met my eyes. Elena, this is more than assault. This is a pattern of neglect and coercive control. You are doing everything right. Avery walked in as May finished documenting, holding 2 coffees and a look of fierce relief when she saw me sitting upright. Without hesitation, she placed 1 coffee on the tray table and the other into May's hand. You are her lawyer, right? Whatever you need from me, I am here. May nodded gratefully. Your eyewitness statement will be crucial. Avery pulled up a chair. I saw him hit her. I heard the punches. I heard her hit the floor. I heard her trying to breathe. And I heard her parents lie to the EMTs. The room fell silent, the weight of her words filling every sterile corner. May tapped her tablet decisively. Then, that is exactly what you will say word for word. As the afternoon light shifted, May outlined the final step communications shutdown. They will reach out, she warned. They will guilt you, threaten you, beg. You promise things they will never give. You will not answer. Every contact goes through me. I nodded, fear and freedom swirling in equal measure. And Elena May said, packing her bag, You are safer than you have ever been. We build from here. After she left, I looked at the folder on the tablet. My bruises, my scans, my mother's voice, the trail of years of minimized pain, and felt a surge roll through me. For the first time in my life, the truth belonged to me, not to the twisted version my family tried to force onto the world. Tonight, I had gathered evidence. Tomorrow, I would build my escape. And soon, very soon, I would build my justice. The hospital room smelled faintly of saline and disinfectant when the door creaked open just after noon. And for a moment, I thought it was Jasmine returning to check my vitals, but the shift in air told me instantly something was wrong. The tension slid in first, then the sound of my father's polished shoes hitting the linoleum floor in that clipped, irritated rhythm I had known all my life, followed by my mother's sharp inhale, the kind she always made before pretending to be wounded, and finally, Ryan's uneven steps, his right hand wrapped in a bulky medical bandage that seemed more theatrical than necessary. I kept my eyes fixed on the window because looking at them felt like stepping back into a burning house, but their presence filled the room with the same suffocating heaviness I had grown up breathing. My father stopped at the edge of the bed and cleared his throat, a sound that used to make me brace instinctively. Well, he said with an exasperation so casual it made my bruised ribs tighten, you certainly made things complicated. My mother hovered behind him, clutching a paper bag like a peace offering. No one asked for, her eyes darting to Ryan as if monitoring his emotional temperature. We brought banana bread, she murmured, voice trembling with performed concern. Your favorite. It was not and never had been. I slowly turned my head toward them, every movement stiff. I nearly died. My words came out hoarse, strained but steady. My father exhaled sharply. Elena, do not exaggerate. The doctors said you are stable now. I stared at him, my chest rising with shallow breaths. I was bleeding internally. I could not breathe. My mother stepped forward, her expression tightening. Your brother is suffering too, she whispered, gesturing to Ryan's wrapped hand as if it were a newborn child needing protection. Look at him. He is in pain. For a moment, I thought I might laugh, not from humor, but from sheer shock at the audacity, the grotesque reversal of reality. They looked at me, face-swollen stitches lining my scalp, bruises blooming across my ribs, and somehow still mourned what had happened to him. I finally shifted my gaze to Ryan, who stood slumped against the wall, sunglasses hiding most of his expression. He sniffed dramatically. I cannot even move my hand, he muttered bitterly. This whole thing ruined everything. Rage, cold and precise, slid through me like a blade. You hit me, I said quietly. His jaw tightened. You provoked me. My heart seemed to stop for one long, agonizing beat. That word again. Provoked. Always me. Always my fault for existing in proximity to his rage. I reached to the bedside drawer, wincing as I pulled it open and lifted the folder May had helped me prepare earlier. The thick stack of documents felt like an anchor, heavy with truth. "You need to see this," I said, extending it toward my father. He took it reluctantly, flipping open the first page. A color photograph of my bruised ribs stared back at him. His face paled. He turned to the next page, the CT scan of my chest, the clear outline of fractured bones. Then the next notes from the trauma surgeon describing the likelihood of organ bruising. Then the next close-up photos of the stitches on my scalp. My father's expression hardened into something defensive brittle. "What is all this supposed to mean?" he snapped. I met his gaze without flinching. "It means I am filing a restraining order. It means I am pressing charges. It means I am done." My mother gasped like she had been slapped. "Elena, no, you cannot do that. You will ruin Ryan's future." She moved closer, lowering her voice into a pleading tone she only used when something threatened her illusion of control. "We can fix this as a family. You do not need outsiders getting involved." I felt something inside me recoil at the word outsiders because the strangers who had saved me, a neighbor, a nurse, a lawyer, had shown more humanity than the people who shared my DNA. "You left me on the floor," I said softly. "You walked over me so you could take him to get his hand checked." My mother's face twisted. "We did not want him to lose mobility." "I almost lost my life," I replied, and the silence that followed had weight thick and unmoving. Ryan ripped off his sunglasses, revealing reddened eyes, not from guilt, but frustration. "So, now you are going to punish me after everything I deal with." He raised his bandaged hand, waving it dramatically. "Do you even understand how much this hurts?" The irony made my stomach twist. Before I could respond, before my parents could try another round of manipulation, a firm knock hit the door, and May stepped inside with the authority of someone who did not need permission to occupy a room. Her eyes swept across the scene, my pale parents Ryan with his absurdly oversized bandage, and me sitting frail but resolute. "Good afternoon," she said coolly. "I am May Whitmore, Elena's attorney." My mother visibly recoiled. "Attorney, why do you need a lawyer?" May set her bag down, her voice steady. "Because what happened here is a criminal matter, and because, as of this morning, Elena has revoked all financial and legal ties to your household, she is no longer responsible for the mortgage for joint accounts or for any debts incurred in her name." My father's face drained of color. "You cannot do that. She already has." May replied unfazed. "And any further communication from you will go through me." My mother clutched her chest. "This is outrageous! This is overdue!" May corrected her. She turned to Ryan. "As for you, Mr. Cooper, you will be served with a temporary restraining order within the next 48 hours, pending the full hearing. You are not to approach or contact Elena." Ryan's face contorted. "This is unbelievable! She is destroying my life!" I leaned back against the pillow, my ribs screaming but my resolve stronger than the pain. "You almost ended mine," I whispered. May stepped closer to the bed, placing a reassuring hand on the rail. "This conversation is now over," she said firmly. "You all need to leave." My father opened his mouth to argue, but something in May's expression, unshakable, cold, final, shut him down. They shuffled out slowly. Confusion and anger tangled across their faces, and as the door clicked shut behind them, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. The room felt bigger without them, clearer, safer. I looked up at May, my voice barely a breath. "Thank you." She gave a small nod. "This is just the beginning," she said, "but you are not doing it alone." And for once, I believed it. For once, the battlefield was not mine to face by myself. For once, the truth was finally louder than their lies. The hours after my parents and Ryan left the hospital room felt strangely quiet, as if their absence had created a vacuum where the air finally knew how to move without tension. But that silence only lasted a moment, before the real storm began, the kind that did not involve fists or shouted accusations, but paperwork, police interviews, legal filings, and the slow unmasking of people who counted on me staying silent forever. May worked with the precision of a surgeon and the relentlessness of someone who had dismantled families like mine many times before. She stood at the small rolling table by my bedside, opening her laptop and pulling up documents with swift, practiced gestures. "We filed the emergency restraining order today," she said. "Police will need your full statement, and I want Avery's too. The sooner the better." My chest tightened, not from pain this time, but from the weight of what those words meant. This was real. The law was stepping into a place I had been taught since childhood should never be exposed to outsiders. But if the last 48 hours had taught me anything, it was that the people inside that house had never protected me. They had only protected him. "I am ready," I whispered. May nodded approvingly, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. "Good, because they will not go down quietly." She was right. The first wave arrived in the form of a nurse tapping on my door. "Elena, there is an officer here to take your statement." Officer Daniels entered shortly after, a tall woman with steady eyes and a calm presence that made me feel safer than any family member ever had. She introduced herself, pulled up a chair beside my bed, and turned on a small recorder. "Tell me everything from the moment the altercation began," she said gently. I started with the shouting, the smell of spilled beer, the sickening crack of Ryan's fist connecting with my face, the sound of bone giving way, the way the floor rushed up to meet me as my head struck the counter. I described the moment I could not breathe, the metallic taste of blood, the ringing in my ears, and how my vision dimmed as my body gave out. My voice trembled when I explained how my parents stepped over me to get to him, insisting he needed urgent care for his hand. Officer Daniels did not interrupt. Her expression did not twist in disbelief. She simply listened with a focus that made each detail feel seen, recorded in a way my family had refused to acknowledge for years. When I finished, she switched off the recorder. "We will file this immediately," she said. "This qualifies as aggravated assault. You did the right thing reporting it, the right thing." Words no one in my family had ever offered me. As she stood to leave, she added, "I have interviewed your neighbor." Her statement corroborates everything. After she left, I let out a shaky breath. Avery's courage to speak up without hesitation, without fear, felt like another thread pulling me out of the darkness. Minutes later, May returned with updates, her tone clipped but triumphant. "The restraining order is officially filed. Next step serving him." She sat on the edge of the chair, crossing one leg over the other. In the meantime, we prepare for their next move. Their next move came faster than I expected. My phone began buzzing relentlessly. Unknown numbers, blocked numbers, emails, voicemails. May confiscated the phone before I could listen to a single message. No contact, she reminded me. They will weaponize guilt, fear, and nostalgia. It is their entire toolbox. She was right. When she eventually checked the voicemails, she did not let me hear them. Instead, she summarized with the cold detachment of someone used to emotional warfare. "Your mother is crying. Your father is furious. They both insist you are overreacting. They want you to drop everything." I felt a pull in my gut, the old familiar instinct to shoulder the blame, to fix the situation, to bend so they would not break. May saw it immediately. "Their reaction is predictable," she said. "They will try to control the narrative." And control it they did. By the end of the day, the first ripple of their smear campaign began online. A cousin texted me a screenshot of my mother's Facebook post. "Please pray for our family. Our daughter is struggling emotionally and has turned on us during a difficult time. We are trying our best." The comments flooded in instantly, church acquaintances sending hearts-distant relatives typing things like, "Stay strong and kids today do not appreciate their parents." Not one person asked what actually happened. Not one person asked if I was alive. May glanced over my shoulder, reading the post. "This is exactly what I expected." She tapped her pen against her notebook. "Their goal is to shape public opinion before the hearing." "It is working," I whispered, staring at the waves of pity pouring in for them. May shook her head. "It only works if you respond, which you will not." Meanwhile, Avery submitted her official witness statement. Jasmine submitted her medical observations noting the severity of my injuries and the consistency with blunt force trauma. Even the EMTs added comments about my parents' suspicious behavior. The case was building itself piece by piece, every detail a brick in the wall between me and the people who had spent decades pretending my pain did not exist. That evening, May received confirmation that Ryan had been officially served the temporary restraining order. She relayed the officer's notes. He was furious, yelling that I was destroying his life, demanding to know why everyone was taking her side. Hearing that did not bring satisfaction. It brought clarity. He truly believed he was the victim. My parents did too. The next morning, as I lay propped against pillows, Jasmine adjusting my IV, May walked in with fresh determination. "The hearing is scheduled," she said. 2 weeks. My heart stuttered. 2 weeks until I would face them in court. 2 weeks until their lies would slam against the evidence I had finally found the courage to gather. 2 weeks until I could legally sever the chains they wrapped around my life. "We will be ready," May assured me. "I promise." And as I looked at her, at Jasmine, at Avery, 3 women who had become more family to me than those tied to me by blood, I believed her. The legal war had begun, and for the first time I was not afraid of the fight. I was ready for it. The morning of the hearing arrived with a cold clarity that settled into my bones like a second spine. Something solid holding me upright as May wheeled me through the courthouse doors, my ribs still aching with every shallow breath. My arm still locked in a sling, my cheek still marked faintly by the bruise that had once swallowed half my face. And even though the fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the place smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish, it felt less like entering a government building and more like stepping into an arena where for the first time the truth would not be muffled or minimized but amplified in a space where my parents' control could not reach. May walked beside me with her usual composed precision, her briefcase clasped like a weapon she knew exactly how to wield. "Deep breaths," she murmured, glancing down at me. "This is the part they can't spin." I swallowed hard, trying to force my heartbeat into something steady. Ahead of us in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, Ryan stood flanked by our parents, like a wounded soldier returning from battle. His right hand was wrapped in a fresher bandage, now thicker, cleaner, undoubtedly designed to exaggerate the image of his own suffering. My mother fussed over him, adjusting the sling they had somehow convinced a doctor to give him for a sprain that barely existed. My father stood rigid, his jaw clenched, scanning the hallway for sympathetic eyes. When they spotted me, my mother gasped as though I had bruised her, clutching Ryan's good arm possessively. "Look at her," she whispered loudly. "She looks ready for sympathy. Wait until the judge sees how manipulative she is." May didn't even dignify the remark with a response. She simply positioned herself slightly between us, her body a deliberate barrier. "They are rattled," she whispered. "Good. It means the evidence scares them." We entered the courtroom, the walls lined with heavy oak, a judge's bench looming above like an altar to justice, and I felt that same cold clarity steady me again. The judge, a middle-aged man with stern eyes and the no-nonsense air of someone who had witnessed humanity at its worst and still believed in the power of the law, took his seat. "Calling the matter of Elena Cooper versus Ryan Cooper," the clerk announced. I forced myself to lift my chin. I would not shrink today. As proceedings began, Ryan played his role with grotesque dedication. He hunched his shoulders, cradled his wrapped hand, and adopted an expression of hollow suffering, occasionally wincing dramatically whenever the judge glanced his way. My mother dabbed his forehead with a tissue as though he were the victim of a car accident rather than the perpetrator of assault. My father whispered angrily behind his hand any time May spoke, shaking his head in paternal disappointment, performing heartbreak for the spectators in the second row. Then the judge turned to me. "Ms. Cooper," he said gently, "your attorney may begin." May stood with the calmness of someone who sharpened her logic like steel. She walked to the center of the courtroom, clicked her pen once, and began presenting the case with surgical precision. "Your Honor," she said, "this is not merely a dispute between siblings. This is a documented pattern of violence, neglect, coercion, and reckless endangerment, resulting in severe physical harm." She handed the bailiff a thick binder, the evidence folder we had built piece by piece in my hospital room. The judge flipped through the first pages, his stoic expression faltering only once when he reached the photographs of my ribs bruised in deep purples and greens. May continued, her voice steady. These injuries are consistent with repeated blunt force trauma. The CT scans confirm internal bruising. The medical report lists fractures in 3 ribs, a concussion, and contusions along the right arm consistent with defensive wounds. My parents immediately exchanged frantic whispers. Ryan shot me a glare so venomous it might have blistered glass. Furthermore, May said, lifting the next sheet, the neighbor, Ms. Avery Schultz, called 911. 911 after hearing multiple impacts and screams indicating distress. Her official statement confirms she heard Mr. Cooper shouting and striking the victim. The judge nodded, scanning the document. Then came the moment May had prepared me for the voicemails. She played the first one, my mother's voice filling the courtroom like a ghost of every childhood dismissal. "Do not make this worse. Ryan is hurting too." A ripple moved through the room, quiet shock, disgust, disbelief. May clicked to the next. "Your sister did not mean it," my mother's voice repeated, trembling with false fragility. "Please, do not exaggerate." The judge's expression hardened. My father suddenly stood. "Your Honor, that was taken out of context." The judge raised his hand, silencing him. "You will remain seated unless addressed." My father sank back down, face burning. May then turned calmly toward the bench. "Your Honor, these recordings establish a clear pattern. The victim's well-being was dismissed, minimized, and overshadowed by the perpetrator's perceived discomfort. This is emotional coercion layered on top of physical abuse." The judge nodded slowly. "Proceed." Then it was Ryan's turn to speak. He stood dramatically, lifting his swollen hand like a martyr displaying a wound. "Your Honor," he began, voice trembling with practiced fragility. "I was not trying to hurt her. I just reacted. She always pushes me, always makes me feel what the judge interrupted sharply. Ryan blinked, stunned. "She provokes me. She knows how to set me off." The judge stared at him with cold, clinical disbelief. "Mr. Cooper, are you suggesting that being triggered justifies breaking your sister's ribs?" Ryan stammered. I was overwhelmed. She knows I have a temper." The judge leaned forward. "A temper is not an excuse. Not in this courtroom. Not ever." My mother leapt up next. "Your Honor, Ryan is fragile. Elena knows his sensitivity." The judge slammed the gavel once. "Sit down." She collapsed back into her seat, trembling with fear. Not for me, but for the illusion she had spent my entire life maintaining. Then May took the floor, one final time. "Your Honor, the evidence, the statements, and the victim's injuries speak for themselves. We ask for a 3-year restraining order, mandatory anger management, and enforcement of full financial detachment." The judge looked at me. "Ms. Cooper," he said softly, "do you wish to make a statement before I rule?" My throat tightened, but I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." I stood slowly, pain radiating through my side, and faced the room that held the people who created me and the people who failed me. My voice shook at first, but strengthened with every word. He hit me until I could not breathe. My parents stepped over me while I was bleeding to take him to urgent care. They were worried about the hand he used to hurt me, and they blamed me for it. All I want now is safety, and a life that does not depend on my silence. The judge took a long, heavy breath. Then he spoke the words that would change everything. "This court grants a 3-year restraining order effective immediately. Mr. Cooper is ordered to attend mandatory anger management for 12 months. Additionally, all shared financial ties between Ms. Cooper and her parents are severed by court order." The gavel struck once more. "Final." My mother burst into tears. Not grief tears, but outrage, the kind that comes when control is ripped away. My father stood rigid, his mouth pressed, thin eyes cold. Ryan swore under his breath, holding his uselessly wrapped hand like a wounded animal. And for the first time in my life, none of their reactions mattered. May placed her hand on my shoulder gently. Avery exhaled from across the aisle, her eyes shining with pride. I felt my knees tremble not from fear, but from the overwhelming sensation of release, like a weight I had carried since childhood had finally been lifted by a force bigger than me, something that had never existed in my life before today: justice. and as we walked out of the courtroom into the afternoon light, something inside me whispered a truth I had never allowed myself to believe. I survived, and now they would face the consequences of what they did. The fallout began before the courthouse doors even finished swinging shut behind us, as if the universe had been waiting for the gavel to drop before peeling back every mask my family had worn for decades. By the time May wheeled me down the courthouse ramp, my phone, which she still held in her bag like a quarantined object, was vibrating non-stop, each buzz, a frantic echo of the control my parents felt slipping through their fingers. "Do not look at anything yet," May warned, but I could see from the way her jaw flexed that whatever was happening online was exactly what she had predicted the smear campaign had exploded. Avery, walking beside us with a protective presence that steadied my breath, finally murmured, "You should know. Your mom posted something." My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with the exhausted familiarity of someone who already knew the script. By the time we reached the parking garage, May pulled up the post on her tablet, her lips pressed into a flat line. There it was, my mother's profile picture, the same carefully posed church directory photo she used for everything, accompanied by a dramatic caption. "Please pray for our family," it read. "Our daughter has turned against us during a difficult time and is spreading lies that are tearing us apart. Ryan is devastated. We have always done our best." Hundreds of comments poured in already, hearts, prayer emojis, sympathy messages from people who had never bothered to learn anything about me. "Stay strong, Ellie. Children today are so ungrateful. Ryan always seemed so sweet, we're praying for him." Not one comment mentioned me by name. Not one person asked what actually happened. Not one asked if I was okay or alive. It was a digital reenactment of my childhood. My pain invisible, their theatrics center stage. But then something shifted. Beneath the tidal wave of pity, a new comment appeared. A short one, from a neighbor I barely knew. "Were you with Elena at the hospital that night?" Another comment followed. "Did you call 911 for her?" Then another. "Why didn't you mention she was nearly killed?" My mother responded instantly, her tone sugary and condescending. "There was no attack," she misunderstood. "Families argue. Please respect our privacy." But now cracks formed in her narrative. A woman from down the street replied, "Funny the EMTs said police were involved." A former coworker commented, "Is this about what happened to Elena? Because people deserve the truth." Within minutes, my mother's post became less of a sympathy wall and more of a battleground. May watched with one raised brow. They are losing control of the narrative. Good. Meanwhile, Ryan posted a photo of himself, his hand heavily wrapped, his expression pained, captioned with "healing from trauma." "Pray for me." It might have fooled strangers, but not the people who had heard the full story in court. Beneath his post, another shift began. "The article in the county paper says his sister survived a violent assault," someone commented. "Is this the same incident?" another added. "Why is his hand injured if she's the one who was hospitalized?" Slowly their world, the curated family image built on lies, excuses, and fragility, began to unravel. The local paper's report, brief but damning, had spread farther than my parents realized. Woman granted restraining order after violent domestic assault. Injuries include fractures and concussion. They did not name us, but the timeline and details were unmistakable. "People are connecting the dots," Avery said softly. "They are seeing the truth without you having to say a word." Part of me wanted to look away, to curl inward from the exposure, but another part, the part that had spent my whole life being silenced, felt something like validation, a confirmation that I had not imagined the cruelty. Others could finally see it too. May closed the tablet. "Let them unravel," she said. "You do not need to defend yourself. Silence is powerful here." But the public backlash was only half of the fallout. The private unraveling was far uglier. May checked the voicemails my parents had left. My father's voice was tight with rage. "You humiliated us in court. Do you understand what you've done to this family?" My mother's message came next, her tone trembling. "Everyone is asking questions now. How could you do this to Ryan? How could you hurt us like this? Hurt them?" Not a word about me nearly dying. Not a word about my injuries. Only their embarrassment. Only their loss of control. May deleted each message after documenting them another thread in the growing legal file that no longer belonged to them. "This reaction proves exactly why you needed to break free," she said calmly. "They are more concerned with appearances than your life." Over the next few days, the social divide grew. Some relatives tried to guilt me, sending long messages about forgiveness and loyalty. Others surprisingly reached out privately to say, "I always sensed something was wrong. I am sorry we didn't see it sooner. You deserve peace." My parents doubled down. In their next post, my mother wrote, "We ask everyone to please support Ryan in his healing journey." Not a single mention of my name. And yet the comments beneath revealed everything. "Why won't you acknowledge your daughter? Is she okay? Why are you pretending she wasn't hospitalized?" My parents stopped replying. Their silence online was louder than anything they had ever said to me. The masks they had perfected for decades, the devoted mother, the protective father, the sensitive son, were slipping in real time, and all I had to do was breathe and let the truth continue revealing itself. And for the first time, as I sat in my recovery bed, scrolling through the wreckage of their lies, I did not feel fear. I felt freedom. The world was finally seeing what I had lived through. And they were seeing them too without the mask. Healing did not begin with a sunrise or a breakthrough. It began with a quiet moment 3 days after the hearing, when I woke in the hospital and realized for the first time in my life that no one from my family would walk through the door. No one would loom over me with demands or accusations. No one would tell me to calm down or minimize my pain, and instead of feeling abandoned, I felt something startling and unfamiliar. Peace, a gentle spaciousness inside my chest where fear had always lived, and as the morning light crept across the floor, I allowed myself to breathe without apology, to exist without shrinking. That peace deepened once I was discharged and moved into a temporary recovery apartment. May helped arrange a small place near the coast, with white walls, soft linen sheets, and a wide window overlooking the ocean. And in that quiet space, surrounded by the rhythmic pulse of waves, I began the painstaking process of reclaiming pieces of myself I had long believed were too broken to salvage. The first week was brutal physically and emotionally. Each step pulled at the wounds along my ribs. Each movement tugged at the muscles healing around my bruised lungs, and each night brought flashes of Ryan's fist and the sickening crack of bone against bone. But Jasmine visited daily after her shifts, checking my breathing, adjusting my compression wraps, teaching me the right angles to sleep without worsening the fractures. And each time she set her hand on my arm, I felt anchored to the present instead of drowning in the past. Avery visited too often with homemade soup or freshly baked bread, filling the apartment with warmth that reminded me that kindness could be unconditional, not transactional. And then there was therapy mandatory for my healing, terrifying for my pride. Nora, my therapist, had gentle eyes, but a razor-sharp ability to dissect patterns I had spent decades convincing myself were normal. During our first session, she asked, "Who taught you that your pain is inconvenience?" The question split me open. For years, I had believed I was tough, resilient, immune to harm. But Nora helped me see that toughness had been demanded, not chosen, a survival mechanism forced onto a child who learned early that suffering quietly kept the household stable. Week by week, Nora guided me through childhood memories that resurfaced like debris after a storm. My mother stepping over my feverish body to calm Ryan after he lost a game. My father pulling me aside after Ryan screamed at me for winning an award, telling me, "You know how sensitive he is, be supportive." Birthday dinners abandoned because Ryan was not in the mood. My achievements always shadowed by his failures, which somehow required more attention than anything I ever accomplished. Each memory hurt, but each one also loosened the knot inside me, the knot of responsibility that had convinced me for years that loving my family meant disappearing for them. "You were assigned a role," Nora said one afternoon. "The strong one, the stable one, the one who could handle anything. And when you nearly died, they clung to the narrative instead of to you." Hearing those words made something inside me collapse and rebuild simultaneously. Healing was not linear. Some days I woke up furious at myself for not leaving sooner. Other days, I woke up terrified of who I was without the burden of caretaking, without the endless pressure to absorb chaos and make myself smaller. But most days, slowly, gently, I began to feel the unfamiliar stability of a life that did not revolve around someone else's temper. Jasmine and Avery became fixtures in that life, sisters by choice, not blood. Jasmine taught me breathing techniques when the nightmares tightened my lungs. Avery took me on slow walks along the boardwalk as my body strengthened her steady presence, proving I did not need to brace myself around everyone. And May, pragmatic fierce. May checked in often not with pity, but with updates and encouragement. "Your financial detachment is complete," she said one afternoon, handing me a sealed envelope. "Your parents have no legal access to your accounts or medical decisions, and Ryan is in non-compliance with his anger management schedule already." Instead of fear, I felt relief. Their instability was no longer my burden. Every small milestone felt monumental the first time I slept through the night without jolting awake. The first time I looked at the ocean and felt wonder instead of tension. The first time I realized my ribs no longer protested each breath. The first time I answered the question, "How are you?" with something other than "I am fine," because for once I genuinely meant it. I began cooking again, not because someone demanded it, but because the smell of garlic and butter made the apartment feel alive. I bought myself a soft blue sweater I would never have dared to buy before because I had always been told not to waste money on myself. I taught myself how to stretch without wincing, how to rest without guilt, how to feel joy without permission. And slowly, I built connections outside the tiny world my parents forced me into. At Nora's suggestion, I joined a local support group for survivors of family abuse. The first meeting left me raw, listening to strangers speak truths I had lived but never named. But by the third session, when it was finally my turn to share, I felt the weight in my chest crack open as I said out loud, I thought love meant endurance. I thought family meant sacrifice. I thought silence kept us together. But it only kept me invisible. The room nodded, seeing me in a way my family never had. Encouraged by that sense of belonging, I applied to be a volunteer speaker at a domestic violence awareness event. The night I told my story publicly, still trembling, still healing, I watched people in the crowd wipe away tears, women squeeze each other's hands, men bow their heads as if reckoning with their own pasts. Afterward, a woman approached me, gripping her daughter's hand, and said, "You helped us see something we were afraid to face." "Thank you." Her words stitched another tear inside me closed. As months passed, the scars on my body faded to pale reminders, but the deeper wounds healed in layers, slow, patient, irreversible. And every time I looked at the ocean outside my window, each wave rising and falling, I felt a reflection of myself in the rhythm. Sometimes fierce, sometimes calm, always moving forward. For the first time in my life, I was not surviving. I was rebuilding. I was growing. I was healing the parts they broke, not for them, not in spite of them, but finally beautifully for me. 1 year after the night Ryan's fists nearly stopped my heart, I stood barefoot on the cool sand of the same coastline that had carried me through countless mornings of trembling breaths and hesitant steps toward healing. And as the horizon slowly shifted from charcoal to pale gold, I realized that the person staring back at me in the reflection of the rising sun was not the shattered woman who had once begged for scraps of affection from people who called themselves family, but someone rebuilt someone stronger, someone finally whole. The ocean breeze lifted my hair, brushing against the faint scar near my temple, a mark that once felt like a brand of shame, but now rested on my skin like a badge of survival. And I closed my eyes, letting the steady rhythm of the waves drown out the echo of old memories that no longer held power over my present. Justice had come in waves, too. Not all at once, but piece by deliberate piece, starting with the restraining order that kept Ryan out of my orbit and continuing with the slow unraveling of the lies my parents had spun for years. Their smear campaign had fizzled months ago, collapsing under the weight of reality as neighbors, co-workers, and extended relatives learned the truth through police reports, court records, and the local article that followed Ryan's second arrest. Yes, second arrest. 6 months after the court hearing, Ryan was taken into custody again, this time for assaulting a man outside a bar after an argument over something as trivial as a spilled drink. The police report noted he threw the first punch with his injured hand, proving what I already knew: he had never been fragile, only dangerous. The judge did not go easy on him this time. With his history, his probation for my case, and his blatant failure to attend mandatory anger management classes, he was charged with a felony. When May told me, she said it gently, not celebratory, but factual. He did this to himself, she said, and now he will finally face real consequences. My parents had begged, pleaded, cried at the courthouse, their concern wrapped entirely around Ryan's future, never once acknowledging what he had taken from mine. They asked me, no, demanded, that I write a letter defending his character. They insisted he just needed another chance, that family does not turn their backs on each other, that I owed him compassion. I responded with silence. May intercepted every call, every message, every attempt to guilt me into submission. Eventually, they stopped trying to reach me directly, turning their efforts toward the world instead, but the world had grown tired of the narrative. The masks they had worn so well were gone, stripped away by truth evidence, and the undeniable fact that their son had nearly killed their daughter, and they had worried more about the hand he hurt doing it. In the months that followed, I built a life that belonged only to me. My small apartment by the sea became a sanctuary filled with soft colors, thrifted furniture, and plants that somehow thrived despite my inconsistent watering. Jasmine visited on nights she finished late shifts bringing takeout, and her stubborn insistence that healing is not a race. Avery became my weekend companion, dragging me to farmers markets and sunrise walks, reminding me gently that joy could be relearned. And May, who had fought for me harder than my parents ever had, became someone I knew I could call, not just for legal counsel, but for the quiet comfort of someone who believed in my future. I continued therapy with Nora, peeling back layers of silence and trauma that had once seemed impossible to unravel. We talked about grief, not just the grief of what happened in that kitchen, but the grief of losing the fantasy of a family I had clung to for decades. "You are not mourning them," Nora had said one session, her voice soft but firm. "You are mourning the version of them that never existed." Those words stayed with me. They shaped my healing more than anything else. And as my confidence grew, so did my voice. I began writing about my recovery, not naming names, not exposing identities, but sharing the emotional landscape of surviving family violence. My posts resonated with people across the country. Women and men wrote to me saying they recognized their own stories in mine. Survivors of childhood neglect, adults who had carried the weight of being the strong one. People who had learned too late that love should never require silence. With May's help, I turned those posts into a small nonprofit called Quiet No More, a support network for survivors of intrafamily abuse. We held virtual meetings at first, then in-person gatherings at a local community center. The first time I sat in a circle with a dozen strangers sharing their own stories. Voices, trembling hands, shaking truths, long buried, rising to the surface, I felt something inside me lock into place. Purpose, not the kind forced onto me by obligation or guilt. A purpose chosen. A purpose earned. On the anniversary of the attack, I returned to the beach at dawn. I held no ceremony, no dramatic ritual. I simply stood with my toes in the surf and whispered, "I survived." The wind carried the words away, scattering them across the water. I thought briefly of Ryan sitting in a correctional facility serving the sentence he earned. I thought of my mother and father tangled in their own denial, still trying to salvage whatever pieces of their social reputation remained. But none of those thoughts carried weight anymore. They drifted away as quickly as they came, like waves breaking and retreating without leaving marks on the sand. Because justice had not been the moment the judge's gavel struck. It had been every boundary I set afterward, every silence I refused to break, every breath I took in a life finally free of fear. And standing there on the shoreline, the sun rising brighter with each passing second, I understood something I had never truly believed before leaving was not betrayal. Staying would have been. I turned toward the apartment, toward my future, toward a life that finally felt like mine, and as the ocean roared behind me, powerful and endless, I whispered the truth that had taken me 32 years to learn. I am enough, and I am free. If you made it all the way here, thank you for staying with me through every painful twist, every moment of truth, and every breath it took to walk away from a family that taught me silence instead of love. Now I want to hear from you truly. Have you ever been the strong one in your family, the person everyone leaned on while no one ever checked if you were breaking? Have you ever carried the weight of someone else's anger, someone else's chaos, someone else's expectations until you realized you were disappearing in the process? And if you've lived through it, if you've ever been dismissed, minimized, blamed, or made to feel invisible, then you already know how powerful it is to finally say enough, even when the people you expected to stand beside you turned their backs. Stories like mine are more common than people admit, especially in families that look perfect from the outside but are rotting behind closed doors. So I want to ask you directly, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed quiet to keep the peace? Would you have protected the one who hurt you because you were taught that family means forgiveness at any cost? Or would you I finally did choose yourself, choose safety, truth, and a life no longer built on someone else's rage? And let me ask you this too. Have you ever watched someone you love protect the person who harmed you? Have you ever seen parents or relatives twist a story to make you the villain, just because acknowledging the truth would force them to face their own failures? If any part of my journey resonates with you, please share your story in the comments, not just for me, but for the thousands of others reading who might need the courage you have. Your voice might be the one that reminds someone they're not alone. And if you're still in a situation like the one I escaped, please hear this. You are not dramatic. You are not ungrateful. You are not overreacting. You are hurting. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be believed. You deserve people who show up when the lights go out, not people who run to comfort the one who broke you. Before you scroll away, tell me, where are you watching from? What time is it where you are, and what moment in this story hit you the hardest? Was it the ER lights, the phone call where they worried about his hand instead of my life, the courtroom, or the moment I whispered on the beach that I was finally free? Your comments help this community grow into a place where survivors, supporters, and anyone who has ever been silenced can finally speak up without fear. And if you believe stories like this should reach more people, people who might need a sign, a reminder, a spark of courage, then tap, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might be living their own quiet battle. Remember this: walking away isn't cruelty. Staying silent isn't loyalty. And choosing yourself isn't selfish, it might just save your life. Now it's your turn. Drop your thoughts below. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me what part of this story stayed with you. And tell me from wherever you are in the world that you made it through your own night and came out stronger.